The morning sun peeked through the elegant curtains of the Grand Plaza Hotel's presidential suite, where Richard Chen sat typing furiously on his laptop. At 45, he had everything money could buy: designer suits, luxury cars, and a tech company worth billions. But there was one thing his wealth couldn't purchase: patience. "Where's my breakfast?" he muttered, checking his platinum watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The breakfast order was barely 10 minutes late, but in Richard's world, every minute cost thousands. Down in the hotel kitchen, Mrs. Rose Thompson, a grandmother of 3 who had worked at the Grand Plaza for over 30 years, was carefully arranging his elaborate breakfast order. Her gentle hands, marked with age spots and years of hard work, made sure everything was perfect, from the precisely cooked eggs to the artfully arranged fresh fruit. "Take your time, Rose," another kitchen staff member said, noticing her slightly slower movements that morning. "Your arthritis acting up again?" "Just a bit," Rose smiled, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "But Mr. Chen likes his breakfast just so, and I want to make sure it's right." What she didn't mention was how her arthritis medication had gotten more expensive, forcing her to pick up extra shifts at the hotel. Finally, Rose pushed her cart toward the presidential suite, her sensible shoes making soft sounds against the plushed carpet. Just as she was about to knock, her phone vibrated, a text from her grandson about his college application. The small distraction caused her hand to shake slightly as she arranged the plates on the serving cart. The door flew open before she could knock. Richard stood there in his $5,000 suit, his face twisted with impatience. "Finally, what took you so long? Some of us actually have important work to do." "I'm very sorry for the delay, sir," Rose said softly, maintaining her dignity. "We wanted to ensure everything was prepared to your specifications." "Specifications?" Richard sneered, looking at her like she was something stuck to his shoe. "It's breakfast, not a rocket launch. Or is that concept too complicated for someone like you to understand?" A young couple walking past slowed down, the woman already pulling out her phone. But Richard was too focused on his tirade to notice. "Look at you. You can barely push the cart straight," he continued, his voice getting louder. "The hotel should retire people before they become completely useless. I'm paying top dollar for this suite, not funding a retirement home." Rose stood quietly, her face composed despite the public humiliation. Her hands, which had helped raise 2 generations of children, served thousands of guests, and volunteered countless hours at her local church, remained steady as she placed his breakfast on the table. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice carrying the same warmth it had held for 30 years of service. "Yes, get someone competent to serve me tomorrow. Someone who understands that time is money." He slammed the door, leaving Rose standing in the hallway. What Richard didn't know was that Rose had spent an extra 5 minutes that morning making sure his eggs were cooked exactly the way his mother used to make them, a detail she remembered from a conversation with his mom years ago, when she was just another struggling single parent staying at the hotel during a business trip. As Rose walked back to the service elevator, she held her head high. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her grandson about his dream of becoming a lawyer. She smiled, knowing that every difficult moment at work was worth it for the future she was helping to build. Little did Richard know that his morning outburst would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the very foundation of his carefully constructed world. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, and tomorrow would bring a knock on his door that would change everything. By sunrise the next morning, Richard Chen's world had turned upside down. The young couple in the hallway had captured everything on their phone, and the internet was doing what it does best, spreading the truth like wildfire. "Have you seen this?" his assistant texted, along with a link to a video that already had 3 million views. Richard's hand trembled as he pressed play. There he was, in his expensive suit, berating Rose Thompson as if she were nothing. The comments below the video told a different story, one about who Rose really was. "Mrs. Thompson helped my mom get her GED while working 2 jobs," one comment read. Another chimed in, "That's the same lady who brings soup to elderly residents in my building every Sunday." The stories kept flowing, painting a picture of a woman who had touched countless lives. Someone had done their homework. Within hours, Rose's story was everywhere. How she'd raised her daughter alone after her husband, a veteran, passed away. How that daughter had become a teacher but lost her battle with cancer 5 years ago, leaving Rose to care for 3 grandchildren. How she worked 2 jobs, the morning shift at the hotel and evenings at a local diner, to help put her grandkids through school. "Sir, our stock is down 12% and falling," Richard's financial advisor called to report. "Social media is calling for a boycott of our products. Major news networks are picking up the story." Richard paced his suite, watching his phone explode with notifications. Hashtag Justice for Rose was trending nationwide. His own employees were sharing the video, not realizing their boss was the man in it. Former hotel guests came forward with their own stories about Rose's kindness, the time she stayed late to help a lost child, the holiday she spent comforting a lonely traveler, the countless small acts of dignity she showed to everyone she met. "Your mother is trying to reach you," his assistant messaged. Richard ignored it. He hadn't spoken to his mom in months. She never approved of how success had changed him. The hotel manager knocked on his door around noon. "Mr. Chen, there are reporters in the lobby. They're requesting a statement." Richard waved him away, but the damage was done. Every major news outlet was running the story. Tech billionaire berates beloved hotel worker. What caught everyone's attention wasn't just Richard's behavior, it was Rose's response. Security footage showed her returning to work immediately after the incident, helping a young mother with a stroller, offering a kind word to a stressed-out businessman. Even after being humiliated, she chose to spread kindness. "Remember when we used to stay at hotels like this?" His mother's voice message played. "Remember who we were before the money?" Richard deleted it without listening to the end. By evening, the video had reached international news. Rose's community rallied around her: hotel workers, diner customers, parents of kids she'd helped with homework at the library. They shared stories of a woman who worked hard not just to survive, but to lift others up with her. "We're organizing a GoFundMe for her grandchildren's college fund," someone posted. Within hours, it had raised more than Richard spent on his morning coffee run. His phone rang again, his company's board of directors calling an emergency meeting. This wasn't just about one viral video anymore. This was about the stark contrast between 2 types of wealth: Richard's hollow empire of dollars and cents, and Rose's rich legacy of kindness and community. As night fell over the city, Richard stood at his suite window, looking down at the growing crowd of supporters holding candles for Rose. Somewhere in that city, she was probably still working her second shift at the diner, unaware that she had become a symbol of dignity in the face of disrespect. Tomorrow would bring another knock on his door, one that would force Richard to confront not just his actions, but the long road that had led him to become someone his younger self wouldn't recognize. Sometimes the hardest mirror to face is the one held up by those we've wronged. The knock came at exactly 9:00 a.m. Richard Chen had barely slept, his phone buzzing all night with messages from angry board members and concerned investors. When he opened the door, he found himself face to face with a young man in a perfectly tailored suit, the kind that spoke of quiet success rather than flashy wealth. "Good morning, Mr. Chen. I'm David Thompson," the man said with a calm smile. "Mrs. Rose Thompson is my grandmother. Do you have a moment to talk?" Richard's throat went dry. He'd expected lawyers with threats and demands, not this composed young man with kind eyes that reminded him so much of Rose's. He gestured for David to enter the suite. "I won't take much of your time," David said, settling into an armchair. "I just thought you should know a few things about the woman you met yesterday." He pulled out an old photograph from his briefcase. "This was my grandmother in 1963, standing outside her first workplace. She was 16. The black and white photo showed a young Rose, wearing a neat uniform, her smile just as warm as it was today. She worked as a cleaner then too," David continued. "But she also attended night school, studying whenever she could. During the civil rights movement, she helped organize literacy classes for other workers. She believed education was the key to a better future." Richard sat quietly, the weight of his actions pressing heavier with each word. David shared more photos: Rose at her daughter's college graduation, Rose volunteering at a homeless shelter, Rose at her husband's military funeral. "When my mother got sick," David's voice softened, "Grandma Rose took on extra shifts to help with the medical bills. Even then, she kept tutoring kids at the community center. She'd pack extra sandwiches for children who came to study with empty stomachs." The young man wasn't angry or accusatory. Instead, he spoke with pride about his grandmother's legacy. Do you know how many kids have gone to college because of her? 23. She keeps a photo of each one. Every time she gets a bonus or a good tip, it goes into what she calls her future fund, helping other hotel workers' children afford textbooks or pay for college applications. David pulled out one more photo and Richard's heart stopped. It showed Rose, much younger, standing next to a woman he knew all too well, his own mother. 1995, David said softly. Your mother was working as a waitress at the hotel restaurant. Grandma Rose noticed she was struggling to balance work with caring for her young son. She adjusted her schedule to help with childcare, taught her how to budget her tips, even helped her prepare for job interviews. Richard's hands shook as he stared at the photo. He remembered those days vaguely, staying in the hotel staff room after school, doing homework while a kind lady brought him milk and cookies. He'd been so young and life had been so different then. That little boy in the picture, David continued, grew up to become a successful businessman because two hard-working women believed in a better future. One of them was your mother. The other was the lady you met yesterday. Standing up, David straightened his tie, a simple blue one that Richard suddenly recognized as similar to the one Rose had helped him pick out for his first job interview, though he hadn't remembered that moment until now. I'm not here to shame you, Mr. Chen. Grandma Rose wouldn't want that. She always says everyone deserves a chance to be better tomorrow than they were yesterday. David placed a business card on the table. I run a community education program in our neighborhood. If you'd like to understand where you come from, and maybe who you really want to be, come visit us sometime. As David turned to leave, he paused at the door. Oh, and one more thing. Grandma Rose asked me to tell you she's sorry your eggs weren't hot enough yesterday. She'll make sure they're perfect today. The door closed softly, leaving Richard alone with a handful of photographs and the realization that he had forgotten not just his manners, but his entire history. Outside, the morning sun painted the city gold, just like it had 28 years ago when a little boy sat doing homework in a hotel staff room, watched over by a woman who believed every person deserved kindness, even those who might forget to return it someday. Richard sat alone in his suite for hours after David left, the old photographs spread across his coffee table. His hands trembled as he finally did what he should have done yesterday. He called his mother. I saw the video, she said quietly when she picked up. I've been waiting for your call. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? His voice cracked. About Rose? About how she helped us. A soft sigh came through the phone. I tried, Richard. Every time you got a new promotion, bought a bigger house, I tried to remind you of where we came from. But you always changed the subject. It was like you wanted to forget those days. The memories came flooding back now. Rose helping him with multiplication tables while his mother worked double shifts. The Christmas when mysterious presents appeared outside their tiny apartment, a warm coat for him, a pot set for his mother. The day Rose taught him how to tie a tie for his first job interview at 16. Remember the day you got your college acceptance letter? His mother asked. Rose was the first person I called. She cried with joy. She believed in you so much, Richard. Even yesterday, when that happened, she still made your eggs exactly how you liked them as a boy. Richard's chest felt tight. I became exactly the kind of person I used to hate, he whispered. No, his mother corrected him. You became the kind of person you thought you needed to be to prove you weren't that struggling kid anymore. But that kid, he was a good boy. Rose used to say you had a heart bigger than your dreams. Richard walked to his window, looking down at the city below. Somewhere out there, Rose was probably starting her second shift at the diner, still helping others despite everything. She kept track of you, you know, his mother continued. Every news article about your success, she'd clip it out. Show it to the other kids she helped, telling them, see, you can do anything. She was so proud, until the articles started showing a different side of you. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, just like the evenings when Rose would let him help her water the little flower pots she kept in the hotel's staff room. There's something else you should know, his mother said softly. Remember when you needed that loan for your first startup? The one you said came from a silent investor. Richard's heart stopped. That was. Rose had been saving for years. When I mentioned you were struggling to find investors, she didn't hesitate. That boy's going to change the world, she said. He just needs a chance. She made me promise never to tell you. The phone slipped from Richard's hand, clattering to the floor. $20,000, the seed money that had started everything. He paid it back to the investment company within a year, never knowing that the money had come from years of tips and extra shifts, given freely by someone who believed in him more than he believed in himself. He picked up the business card David had left. The community center wasn't far. Through his window, he could see the older part of the city where he grew up, where people like Rose still worked to make dreams possible for others. A notification popped up on his laptop, another news article about yesterday's incident. But this time, instead of feeling angry or scared, he felt something different. Something like the warmth he used to feel in that staff room, doing homework while Rose hummed old songs and told him he could be anything he wanted to be. Opening his closet, Richard pushed past the designer suits until he found it, the blue tie from his first job interview. It was worn at the edges now, but the knot was still perfect, just like Rose had taught him. Tomorrow, he would wear this tie to the community center. Tomorrow, he would start remembering who he was before the money made him forget. Tomorrow, he would begin to make things right. But first, he had a diner to visit, where an elderly waitress was probably still serving others with the same kindness she'd shown a little boy who once needed help with his multiplication tables. The small diner on Pine Street looked exactly like thousands of others across the city, but to Richard, walking through its door felt like stepping through time. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, wearing his old blue tie and the simplest suit he owned. Rose was there, just as his mother said she would be, wearing a different uniform but carrying herself with the same grace she showed at the hotel. She was pouring coffee for an elderly man while simultaneously helping a young mother calm her crying baby. "Try holding her like this," Rose was saying, demonstrating with gentle hands. "My daughter used to calm right down when I held her this way." The baby's cries softened to quiet coos. Richard stood quietly by the door watching. In just 5 minutes, he saw Rose help 3 different people in small but meaningful ways, showing a teenager how to count his tips, offering a kind word to a tired-looking businessman, making sure the elderly man's coffee stayed hot. When she finally noticed him, she showed no anger, no fear, no resentment. "Would you like a seat at the counter?" she asked, as if he were any other customer, as if yesterday had never happened. "I remember now," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I remember the multiplication tables, the Christmas presents, the tie." He touched the blue tie he was wearing. "Everything." Rose's eyes softened with recognition. "You kept it all these years." "It was the first tie I ever owned," he replied, following her to a quiet corner of the diner. "You taught me how to tie it," said it brought out the kindness in my eyes. The evening crowd was thinning out, leaving them in a bubble of quiet beneath the diner's humming fluorescent lights. Rose poured 2 cups of coffee, one for him, one for herself. "Your mother called," she said, stirring sugar into her cup. "Told me you finally learned about the startup money." Richard's hands shook as he held his coffee. "Why didn't you tell me? I could have paid you back properly, with interest." Rose's laugh was gentle, like wind chimes. "Money was never the point, child. I didn't invest in your business, I invested in you. The same way I invest in all my kids." She pulled out a 1-photo album from behind the counter, opening it to show pictures of dozens of young people. "See this one? She's a doctor now. This boy here? Teaching science in high school. And this girl just finished law school." Each photo had a story, each story had a dream. And at the center of each dream was Rose, believing, supporting, nurturing. "I thought I was successful because I was smarter, worked harder," Richard admitted. "But I was successful because people like you and Mom created a foundation for me to build on." Rose reached across the table and straightened his tie, just like she used to. "You know what I see when I look at you? Not the man from yesterday. I see the little boy who used to share his cookies with other kids in the staff room. He's still in there." "I want to make things right," Richard said. "Not just with you, with everyone. I want to be that person again." Rose smiled. "Then let's start small. See that young man by the window? He's studying for his college entrance exams. Works 2 jobs, just like your mother used to. Why don't you go hear his story? For the next 3 hours, Richard sat in that corner booth. He listened to stories about dreams bigger than bank accounts, about determination stronger than circumstances. He learned about the informal support network Rose had built over decades, a web of kindness that caught those who were falling and lifted those who were rising. When the last customer left and Rose started wiping down tables, Richard stood to help. She handed him a cloth without a word, and together they cleaned in comfortable silence. "Tomorrow's my day at the community center," Rose said as they finished. "Children's reading program in the morning, adult literacy class in the afternoon. Would you like to come?" Richard looked at his reflection in the diner's window, a man in a worn blue tie, holding a cleaning cloth, finally remembering who he was meant to be. "I'll be there," he promised. And this time he meant it. The community center was nothing like the luxury buildings Richard was used to. The paint was peeling in places, and the furniture had seen better days, but the walls were covered with children's artwork and inspiring messages. As he walked in that morning, he could hear the sound of young voices reading aloud. Rose sat in a worn armchair, surrounded by children with books in their laps. "Sound it out," she encouraged a small boy struggling with a word. "Remember what we learned about breaking big words into smaller pieces." Richard watched from the doorway, remembering how she'd used the same patient tone with him when he struggled with fractions. The memory stirred something in him, a decision that had been forming since last night. During a break, he asked Rose and David to meet him privately. His hands were shaking as he pulled out some papers from his briefcase. "I've been up all night," he began, thinking about how to make things right, not just with words, but with actions. He spread the documents on the table. "I'm establishing an education foundation. $20 million to start. In your name, Rose." Rose started to protest, but Richard gently raised his hand. "Please, let me finish. This isn't charity. It's an investment, the kind you taught me about. An investment in people who just need someone to believe in them." David picked up the papers, his eyes widening as he read. "This would provide full scholarships, living expenses, books. For service workers' children," Richard completed. "Hotel staff, restaurant workers, cleaners, people like my mom was, like you are, Rose. People who work hard to build others up while trying to lift themselves too." But Richard wasn't finished. He pulled out another set of documents. "I'm also implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training at my company, and not the usual corporate kind. I want real stories, real experiences. Would you help us design it, Rose? Help our executives understand the kind of leadership you've shown all these years?" Rose dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "You don't need to do all this to apologize," she said softly. "This isn't just an apology," Richard replied. "This is about becoming who I should have been all along. The person you and Mom always believed I could be." That afternoon, Richard stayed for the adult literacy class. He sat next to a young waitress who was studying for her GED while raising 2 kids. As he helped her with basic algebra, he saw himself in her determination, his mother in her dreams. Later, Rose showed him the center's small library, really just 2 shelves of donated books. "Sometimes," she said, "a single book can change someone's whole future. Give them ideas they never had before, show them possibilities they never imagined." Richard looked around the modest room, then at his phone full of emails from his board of directors about PR strategies and damage control. He deleted them all and turned to Rose. "What if we made this bigger?" he asked. "Not just scholarships, but a whole network of learning centers. Places where people can study, get tutoring, use computers. We could start here, make this the model, then expand to other neighborhoods." Rose's eyes lit up. "You mean like a community college, but free, open to everyone?" "Exactly," Richard nodded. "With childcare facilities like you provided for me and Mom. Job training programs, English classes for immigrants. Everything you've been doing all these years, but with proper funding and support." As they talked, more ideas flowed. David suggested adding a legal aid clinic. Rose mentioned need for health education classes. Richard took notes, no longer the arrogant CEO, but a student learning from those who understood true community leadership. That evening, as they were closing up the center, a young mother came in, looking anxious. "I know it's late," she apologized, "but I just got off my shift. I heard you help people with job applications." Without hesitation, Rose welcomed her in. Richard watched as Rose sat with the woman, helping her translate years of service industry experience into powerful resume points. He saw himself 20 years ago getting the same help with his first job application. "You know," Rose said later, walking him to his car, "sometimes the biggest change isn't in what we do, but in how we see things. Yesterday you saw me as just a maid. Today you're seeing what I actually do. But most importantly, you're seeing yourself clearly for the first time in years." Richard looked back at the community center, its windows still glowing warmly in the dusk. "I see now that true wealth isn't in a bank account," he said. "It's in the lives we touch, the people we help lift up." Rose patted his arm. "Now that's the little boy I remember. The one who shared his cookies." 1 year later, the Grand Plaza Hotel's largest ballroom was filled to capacity. Not with the usual wealthy guests, but with hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by one remarkable woman. Rose Thompson sat in the front row, trying to hide her tears as her grandson David took the stage. "Welcome to the first annual Rose Thompson Community Achievement Awards," David announced. "Today, we celebrate not just my grandmother, but the ripple effect of kindness that can change an entire community." Richard watched from the back of the room, remembering that morning a year ago when his viral moment of cruelty had led to an unexpected journey of redemption. He was different now, his designer suits replaced with more modest clothing, his arrogant smirk transformed into a genuine smile. The presentation screen lit up with photos and stories. The first class of Rose Thompson scholars, 50 students who are now in college. The new community learning centers, 5 of them already open across the city. The free childcare program that had helped hundreds of working parents pursue their education. "And none of this would have been possible," David continued, "without the partnership of someone who learned firsthand the power of second chances." He gestured to Richard, who quietly made his way to the stage. Richard stood at the podium, adjusting that same blue tie Rose had helped him with so many years ago. "A year ago, I thought I was successful because I had money," he began. "Today, I know I'm successful because I finally learned what Rose tried to teach me as a child, that true wealth is measured by the lives we touch." He shared how the Education Foundation had grown beyond their initial dreams, how Rose's approach to community support had been adopted by corporations nationwide, how her simple philosophy, that everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow, had transformed not just individual lives, but entire neighborhoods. But perhaps the most important lesson, Richard continued, his voice softening, was one that Rose taught me twice. First as a child, when she helped a struggling single mother and her son believe in possibilities. And again as an adult, when she showed me that it's never too late to remember who you really are. The screen behind him showed clips from the past year. Rose teaching her last class at the hotel before retiring to run the foundation full-time. Richard sitting with students, learning their stories, helping them with homework. The opening ceremonies of each new learning center, where Rose's philosophy of kindness and education was being passed on to new generations. "Today, we're not just celebrating Rose," Richard announced. "We're celebrating every person who ever worked extra shifts to help their children study. Every parent who sat in night classes after long days of work. Every student who dared to dream bigger than their circumstances." He turned to Rose, who was now being escorted to the stage by her grandson. Rose never wanted buildings named after her or plaques on walls. She just wanted to make sure that everyone had the same chance she gave me, the chance to become who they were meant to be. Rose took the microphone, her hands slightly shaky but her voice clear and strong. "Look around this room," she said. "I see hotel maids whose children are now doctors, restaurant workers whose grandchildren are teaching in universities, a CEO who remembered his true worth wasn't in his bank account, but in his capacity to help others." The room erupted in applause as Rose presented the first set of Community Achievement Awards, not to wealthy donors or powerful executives, but to everyday heroes who, like her, had been quietly changing lives all along. As the ceremony ended, Richard watched Rose surrounded by well-wishers, her face glowing with joy. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother, "So proud of who you've become again." Later that evening, Rose found Richard in the hotel's old staff room, now transformed into a study space for employees and their children. He was helping a young boy with his math homework, using the same patient tone she had once used with him. You know, Rose said, settling into her favorite old chair, sometimes the biggest mistakes lead us to exactly where we need to be. Richard looked around the room, at the walls now covered with college acceptance letters and thank you notes, at the children bent over books with dreams in their eyes. No, he smiled, sometimes the biggest blessings come disguised as mistakes, and the greatest teachers come disguised as hotel maids. Rose pulled out a cookie from her bag, just like she used to years ago, and broke it in half to share. Some things, after all, never needed to change.